To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Calm Before. Cole Mitchell adjusted his tactical vest one last time before stepping out of the armored SUV. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the warehouse district, but his mind was already calculating angles, exit routes, and potential threats. At 34, Cole had traded his Army Ranger uniform for the corporate world, but his instincts remained razor-sharp. "Clean operation, boss," radioed Tommy Briggs, his second-in-command, through the earpiece. "Target secured, no casualties." Cole nodded to himself. Another successful high-profile extraction for Hawthorne Security Solutions, the company his father-in-law Gerald had built from nothing. More importantly, it was the company Cole had helped transform from a small-time outfit into a multi-million-dollar operation through his military connections and tactical expertise. The drive back to the office took him through the affluent suburbs where he and Lindsay lived. Their house, a sprawling colonial on 2 acres, came into view, and Cole felt the familiar knot in his stomach. Something had been off with Lindsay for months now. Late nights, hushed phone calls, and a distance that felt like an ocean between them. He'd met Lindsay Hawthorne 5 years ago at a charity gala. She was stunning, charming, and carried herself with the confidence that came from never wanting for anything. Gerald had immediately taken to Cole, seeing in him the son he'd never had and the tactical mind his company needed. Their marriage had seemed perfect, a beautiful wife, a successful business partnership, and a future that looked golden. But perfect was a facade Cole had learned to distrust in Afghanistan. Inside the house, Lindsay was in the kitchen, her blonde hair pulled back as she prepared dinner. She barely looked up when he entered. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone flat. "Productive. We closed the Henderson case." Cole watched her face for any reaction. "Nothing. How about you? Lunch with your college friends again?" "MMM." She turned away, busying herself with the stove. "Dad called. He wants to see you first thing tomorrow." Cole's jaw tightened slightly. Gerald never called ahead unless something was brewing. "Did he say what about?" "No." Lindsay's voice carried an edge he'd been hearing more often lately. "But you know how he gets about his precious company." There it was, the resentment. Lindsay had never hidden her feelings about Cole's role in her father's business. She'd expected to inherit everything, but Gerald had made it clear that Cole was being groomed to take over operations. It was a decision that had created a wedge in their marriage, though Cole suspected there was something deeper at play. That night, as Lindsay showered, Cole noticed her phone buzzing on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a text from Ryan T. that read, "Can't stop thinking about earlier. When can we?" The message was cut off, but Cole had seen enough. Ryan Torres, Gerald's newest hire, a smooth-talking 28-year-old with an MBA and no real-world experience. Cole had opposed hiring him, but Gerald had insisted they needed fresh blood in the organization. Now Cole understood why Lindsay had been so supportive of the decision. Cole's expression remained neutral as he memorized the phone number, but inside, something cold and methodical was awakening. In the Rangers, betrayal meant death, not just for you, but for your entire unit. The rules were different in civilian life, but Cole's principles weren't. He went to bed that night planning his next move, listening to Lindsay's even breathing beside him. She had no idea that her husband was a man who had spent 3 tours hunting the most dangerous people on Earth. She'd made the mistake of thinking corporate Cole was all there was. She was about to learn otherwise. Chapter 2, Gathering Intelligence. The Hawthorne Security Solutions building was a gleaming testament to Gerald's success, but Cole saw it differently as he arrived the next morning. Every office, every hallway, every security camera was a potential asset in what was about to become the most important mission of his life. Gerald's corner office overlooked the city, its walls lined with photos of successful operations and newspaper clippings about the company's growth. Gerald himself, a tall, silver-haired man in his early 60s, looked troubled as Cole entered. "Close the door, son," Gerald said, his voice heavy. "We need to talk." Cole complied, noting the unusual tension in his father-in-law's demeanor. Gerald had always been direct, sometimes brutally so, but this felt different. "I'll get straight to the point," Gerald continued, leaning back in his leather chair. The board is questioning your role here. Some members think we're becoming too dependent on military tactics when we should be focusing on corporate security. Cole raised an eyebrow. Our success rate speaks for itself. We've tripled revenue since I came aboard. I know that, and I've defended you every step of the way. Gerald's voice carried genuine affection. But there are concerns about flexibility, about whether you can adapt to changing market conditions. The words felt rehearsed, and Cole's instincts screamed warning. Gerald had never cared about board opinions before. Something, or someone, had gotten to him. Who's driving this concern? Cole asked carefully. Gerald hesitated. Ryan Torres has presented some compelling alternatives. Fresh approaches to client relations, more emphasis on technological solutions rather than tactical ones. There it was. Cole kept his expression neutral while his mind cataloged this new intelligence. Ryan wasn't just sleeping with his wife. He was positioning himself to take over Cole's role in the company. I see, Cole said simply. What do you need from me? Prove them wrong, Gerald replied, leaning forward. Show me that you can evolve with the company. We have a new client coming in next week, Senator Patricia Whitfield. She needs discreet protection during the campaign season. Handle it personally, but do it their way. Low profile, minimal tactical presence. Cole nodded. Consider it done. As he left Gerald's office, Cole's mind was already working. Ryan Torres was playing a sophisticated game, using Lindsay to get inside information while positioning himself as Cole's replacement. It was actually quite clever, but Ryan had made one critical error. He'd underestimated his opponent. The morning was spent in routine meetings, but Cole used the time to observe. He watched Ryan interact with other employees, noted his scheduled meetings, and paid particular attention to his body language around Lindsay when she visited for lunch. The kiss they shared in the parking lot confirmed everything Cole needed to know. It was passionate, desperate, and completely visible from the security cameras Cole had personally installed. They were taking enormous risks, which meant this affair was serious. They weren't just sleeping together, they were planning something bigger. During his lunch break, Cole made a series of calls to old contacts. Military networks ran deep, and favors were currency in his former world. By the end of the day, he had comprehensive background reports on Ryan Torres being compiled, along with detailed surveillance packages that would make the NSA jealous. But Cole's real edge wasn't technology, it was understanding people. He'd spent years learning to read enemy patterns, to predict behavior under pressure, and to exploit psychological weaknesses. Ryan and Lindsay had several. Their arrogance, their greed, and their complete underestimation of the man they were betraying. That evening, Cole arrived home to find Lindsay more animated than she'd been in months. She was actually humming while preparing dinner, her cheeks flushed with what she probably thought was excitement about her afternoon. You seem happy, Cole observed, pouring himself a glass of wine. Just a good day, she replied, not meeting his eyes. Sometimes it's nice to feel appreciated. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Cole smiled and nodded, playing the oblivious husband while his mind worked through scenarios. How long had this been going on? What exactly were they planning? And most importantly, how spectacular would their downfall be? I'm glad, he said, moving to kiss her cheek. Everyone deserves to feel appreciated. Lindsay's smile faltered slightly at his tone, but she recovered quickly. She had no idea that her husband was already 10 moves ahead in a game she didn't even know they were playing. Cole spent the evening acting normally, watching television and making small talk, all while his phone buzzed with incoming intelligence reports. By bedtime, he had a complete picture of Ryan Torres, his debts, his ambitions, his psychological profile, and most importantly, his weaknesses. The game was on, and Cole Mitchell never lost. Chapter 3, The Storm Breaks. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Cole had been planning to let his enemies reveal more of their hand, but sometimes the enemy chose the battlefield for you. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Cole returned from meeting with Senator Whitfield's security team. The job was progressing smoothly, too smoothly, in fact. Ryan's minimal tactical presence approach was leaving gaping holes in the security plan that could get someone killed. Cole had quietly filled those gaps without advertising the fact, but he'd expected Ryan to notice. Instead, he walked into an ambush. Gerald's office was crowded when Cole arrived. Gerald himself sat behind his desk looking uncomfortable, while 3 board members flanked him. Ryan Torres stood near the window with a manila folder in his hands and the satisfied expression of a man about to deliver a killing blow. "Sit down, Cole," Gerald said, his voice strangely formal. Cole remained standing, his posture relaxed but ready. "In hostile territory, you never gave up tactical advantages. We've discovered some disturbing information," Gerald continued, avoiding eye contact. "Financial irregularities in several recent operations. Unauthorized equipment purchases, expense reports that don't match actual costs, and what appears to be kickbacks from suppliers." Cole's expression didn't change, but his mind was cataloging escape routes and calculating who in the room posed the biggest threat. This was a setup, but it was also sloppy. Either Ryan was overconfident, or he was being pushed by someone else's timeline. "That's a serious accusation," Cole said calmly. "I assume you have evidence." Ryan stepped forward, unable to contain his smugness. "Extensive evidence. Bank records, forged receipts, testimonies from suppliers about inflated invoices. You've been stealing from the company for months." The documents Ryan handed Gerald were professionally prepared, Cole noted. This had taken time and resources to create. More importantly, they were good enough to be convincing but not good enough to survive serious scrutiny. Ryan was definitely being pushed. "These are fabricated," Cole said simply. "Of course you'd say that," Ryan replied, his voice rising slightly. "But the evidence is overwhelming. You've been stealing from your own father-in-law." Gerald finally looked up, and Cole saw genuine pain in the older man's eyes. "Cole, if there's an explanation." "There is," Cole said, "but not the one you're hoping for." The room fell silent. Cole had spent 3 days analyzing every detail of this setup, and he'd identified its fatal flaw. It required Gerald to believe that Cole would betray him. Gerald loved Cole like a son, but he loved his company more. The question was whether Ryan understood that dynamic. "You want my resignation?" Cole continued. "Fine, but I want something in return." "You're hardly in a position to make demands," one of the board members interjected. Cole's smile was cold. "Actually, I'm in the perfect position. See, whoever created this evidence made one critical error. They used my access codes to cover their tracks. But those codes logged every transaction, including the ones that created this fake paper trail." Ryan's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Cole pulled out his phone and scrolled through several screenshots. Fascinating how all these irregularities trace back to terminal sessions initiated from Ryan's workstation. Even more fascinating that they all occurred while I was on documented offsite operations. The room exploded into accusations and denials, but Cole was watching Gerald's face. The older man was putting pieces together, and his expression was shifting from hurt to rage. "You son of a bitch," Gerald whispered, staring at Ryan. "You used my daughter to get inside information, and then you tried to frame Cole?" "That's not," Ryan began. "Where is she?" Gerald's voice boomed through the office. The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Gerald was a lot of things, but he wasn't stupid. If Ryan was willing to frame Cole, what else was he planning? And where exactly was Lindsay during this carefully orchestrated ambush? Cole's phone buzzed with a text from Lindsay. "Meeting ran late. Won't be home until 8. Don't wait up." He showed the message to Gerald, whose face went from red to white in seconds. "She's not at any meeting," Cole said quietly. "She's with him. They're probably celebrating what they think is my downfall right about now." Gerald's hands were shaking as he picked up his desk phone. "Security, I want Ryan Torres escorted from the building immediately. His access is revoked effective now." "You can't do this," Ryan protested as 2 security guards entered. "I have contracts, agreements." "You have nothing," Gerald snarled. "You're fired. Get out." As Ryan was dragged from the office, still protesting his innocence, Cole felt a familiar calm settling over him. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Ryan and Lindsay thought they'd cornered him, but they'd actually just revealed themselves to be exactly as stupid and arrogant as he'd hoped. "I'm sorry, son," Gerald said once they were alone. "I should have trusted you." "You had evidence," Cole replied. "You did what any businessman would do." "What are you going to do about Lindsay?" Cole's smile was arctic. "I'm going to give her exactly what she deserves." By 5 p.m., Cole was at home packing a bag. He had no intention of leaving permanently, but appearances mattered. When Lindsay and Ryan returned from their celebration, they'd find what they expected, a broken man fleeing in defeat. What they wouldn't find was the extensive surveillance network Cole had spent the evening installing throughout the house, or the detailed psychological profiles he'd compiled on both of them, or the comprehensive plan that would systematically destroy everything they thought they'd won. As Cole loaded his bag into the truck, his phone started buzzing with calls. 50 missed calls, just like the opening sequence of this drama. But these weren't calls of sympathy or support. They were calls from his military contacts, each one confirming that Phase 1 of Operation Perfect Storm was ready to commence. Lindsay and Ryan wanted to play games with a decorated Army Ranger. Cole was about to show them what happened when you declared war on someone who'd spent a decade learning how to win against impossible odds. The storm was coming, and they had no idea what they'd unleashed. Chapter 4, Regrouping. Cole's temporary base of operations was a studio apartment in the industrial district, Spartan and functional. He'd rented it under a shell company 3 months ago, the moment his suspicions about Lindsay had crystallized into certainty. The space contained everything he needed: surveillance equipment, secure communications, and most importantly, complete privacy. The first order of business was intelligence gathering. Cole had spent the night cataloging everything Ryan and Lindsay had done wrong in their planning. They'd been so focused on their deception that they'd forgotten basic operational security. Their text messages, email exchanges, and even their choice of meeting locations created a digital trail that would be admissible in court, if Cole chose to go that route. But courts were for people who believed in justice. Cole believed in consequences. His phone rang at 0600 hours, sharp. Tommy Briggs' voice was professional but concerned. "Boss, heard what happened. That's some serious bullshit." "It's handled," Cole replied, pulling up surveillance footage from his house on his laptop. Lindsay and Ryan had returned around midnight, clearly drunk on wine and victory. They'd spent an hour searching the house for hidden assets, unaware that every cabinet they opened was being recorded. "You need backup?" Tommy asked. In their shared military vernacular, this meant, "Do you need help burying bodies?" "Negative. This is a precision operation." Cole's next call was to Marcus Webb, a former Delta Force operator who now ran a private investigation firm. Marcus owed Cole his life from a mission in Kandahar, and debts like that never expired. "I need complete background workups on 2 targets," Cole said, transmitting photos and basic information. Everything from kindergarten forward. Financial records, psychological profiles, family connections, personal weaknesses. "I want to know what scares them most." Timeline: 48 hours. Consider it done. The information started flowing within hours. Ryan Torres was exactly what Cole had expected: a privileged college boy with an MBA, drowning in student loans and credit card debt, desperate to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford. His psychological profile showed classic narcissistic tendencies with underlying insecurity. He was the type who crumbled under real pressure. Lindsay's profile was more complex. She'd grown up wealthy but not happy, with a father who'd been too busy building his empire to provide emotional support. Her string of failed relationships showed a pattern. She was attracted to strength but resented being controlled. She needed to feel superior to her partners, which explained why she'd chosen Ryan. He was weaker than Cole, easier to manipulate. But Cole's real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Angela Martinez, Lindsay's former college roommate, called that afternoon. "Cole, I heard about what happened. Listen, I don't know if this matters, but Lindsay called me last week. She was asking weird questions about divorce law in this state, specifically about prenuptials and business assets." Cole's blood went cold. The prenup he'd signed had seemed standard at the time, protecting Gerald's company from being divided in a divorce. But if Lindsay had found loopholes, what kind of questions, he asked? Whether adultery affected asset distribution, how business partnerships were valued, stuff like that. She also asked about restraining orders and domestic violence claims. There it was. Lindsay wasn't just planning to leave him. She was planning to destroy him completely. The frame job at work was just the opening move. Next would come divorce papers with accusations designed to strip him of everything, followed by criminal charges that would put him in prison. It was actually an elegant plan, Cole admitted grudgingly. She'd get Ryan installed at the company, divorce Cole while claiming abuse, and walk away with half of everything while he rotted in a cell. Gerald would be too devastated by the betrayal to fight effectively, and Ryan would consolidate power before anyone understood what had happened. There was just one problem with their plan. They declared war on someone who was very, very good at war. Cole spent the rest of the day planning his counterattack. Traditional revenge, exposing the affair, fighting in court, trying to prove his innocence, would be playing by their rules. Cole's rules were different. Rule 1. Never fight fair when fighting dirty is an option. Rule 2. Your enemy's greatest strength is always their greatest weakness. Rule 3. The best defense is an overwhelming offense. By evening, Cole had identified the perfect pressure point. Ryan's entire life was built on borrowed money and stolen valor. His MBA was from a second-tier school he'd barely afforded. His car was leased, his clothes were financed, and his apartment was 3 months behind on rent. But more importantly, he'd been lying on his resume about his experience and qualifications. Lindsay's weakness was different, but equally exploitable. Her entire identity was built on being Gerald's precious daughter, the heir to his empire. But Gerald was old school. Family meant loyalty, and betrayal was unforgivable. If Cole could make Gerald see Lindsay as she really was, the old man would cut her off without a second thought. The plan that emerged was surgical in its precision. Cole would give Ryan and Lindsay exactly what they thought they wanted, let them commit to their course of action, and then systematically destroy every foundation their new life was built on. It would take patience, careful timing, and absolute ruthlessness. Fortunately, Cole had all three in abundance. He made one final call that night, to a contact in Las Vegas who specialized in problems that couldn't be solved through legal channels. "Danny? It's Cole Mitchell. I need to cash in that favor from Mosul." "Jesus, Cole. How big are we talking?" "Big enough to ruin 2 lives completely. Think you can handle it?" Danny's laugh was dark. "Brother, for you? I can make people disappear into their own shadows." "When do we start?" "Tomorrow." "And Danny? No half measures. When this is over, I want them to understand that some lines should never be crossed." Cole disconnected the call and stared out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Lindsay and Ryan were probably planning their next move, confident they'd outsmarted him. They thought they were playing chess. They had no idea they'd just entered a war zone. Chapter 5. Setting the Trap. Cole's phone buzzed at 0500 with a message that made him smile for the first time in days. The divorce papers had been filed. Lindsay was moving faster than expected, which meant she was either more confident or more desperate than he'd calculated. Either way, it was useful intelligence. The papers themselves were masterfully crafted lies. Lindsay claimed Cole had become increasingly unstable and threatening, following his termination from Hawthorne Security. She alleged emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and, most dangerously, hinted at physical violence without making direct accusations. Her lawyer was good. The language was carefully chosen to plant seeds of doubt while avoiding outright perjury. But Cole had been expecting this move. In fact, he'd been counting on it. His phone rang as he was reviewing the legal documents. Gerald's voice was strained with exhaustion and betrayal. "She served me with papers too," the older man said, demanding immediate access to company records, claiming she's protecting her inheritance from your criminal activities. "Cole, I don't know what to believe anymore." "Believe the evidence," Cole replied, "and trust your instincts. You built that company from nothing. Would you really have made me your partner if you thought I was capable of betraying you?" There was a long pause. "No," Gerald said finally. "But the things she's saying, if even half of them are true." "They're not," Cole said firmly. "But proving that is going to take time we don't have. She's moving fast because she knows her position is weak. The question is, do you want to find out the truth, or do you want to cut your losses?" "What are you asking me to do?" "Give me 72 hours. Don't respond to any legal demands. Don't grant her access to anything, and don't let Ryan back in the building. If I can't prove what's really happening by Friday, I'll disappear and you'll never hear from me again." Gerald was quiet for a long moment. 72 hours, he agreed. Cole's next stop was a parking garage downtown, where Marcus Webb was waiting with a thick manila envelope. The PI's expression was grim as he handed over the intelligence packet. "Your boy Ryan has been busy," Marcus said. 3 different identity theft scams in college, covered up by daddy's money. 2 sexual assault allegations that were settled out of court. And he's been skimming from petty cash at every job he's held for the past 5 years. And Lindsay. Clean record, but dirty habits. She's been researching how to disappear money offshore, and she's been in contact with someone named Viktor Kozlov, Russian guy who specializes in corporate asset stripping. This isn't just about divorce, Cole. They're planning to rob Gerald blind and disappear. The intelligence confirmed Cole's worst suspicions. This wasn't a simple affair. It was a sophisticated con job. Ryan was likely a professional grifter, and Lindsay was either his willing accomplice or his latest mark. Either way, they were planning to destroy Gerald's life's work. Cole felt his rage crystallize into something cold and precise. Gerald had given him a chance when no one else would, had treated him like a son, had trusted him with everything. These parasites thought they could steal that and walk away. They were about to learn otherwise. I need two things, Cole told Marcus. First, I want complete surveillance on both targets. Every movement, every conversation, every breath. Second, I want you to find Viktor Kozlov and have a conversation with him. What kind of conversation? Cole's smile was winter cold. The kind that explains why it would be very unhealthy for him to continue doing business with my wife. While Marcus coordinated the surveillance operation, Cole began phase 2 of his plan. Danny had arrived from Vegas with a team of specialists, not the kind you'd find in any legitimate security firm, but exactly the kind you needed when the gloves came off. We've got eyes on both targets, Danny reported via encrypted phone. Your wife and her boyfriend are holed up in the Marriott downtown, room 1247. They're not being careful, amateur hour surveillance countermeasures, if any. Good. What about their communications? Tapped and recorded. You want the highlights, or should I send you everything? Highlights first. Cole's earpiece crackled as Danny patched in a conversation from that morning. Ryan, the old man's wavering. We need to accelerate the timeline. Lindsay, what if Cole doesn't break? What if he fights back? Ryan, with what? We've destroyed his credibility and isolated him from his support network. He's finished, baby. By Friday, you'll own half of Hawthorne Security, and I'll own the other half. Lindsay and Cole. Ryan. Cole will be in prison for assault charges we're going to file tomorrow. Self-defense, of course. You'll have the bruises to prove it. The conversation continued, but Cole had heard enough. They were planning to frame him for domestic violence, using staged injuries and manufactured evidence. It was actually quite sophisticated, the kind of plan that would destroy a man's life even if he eventually proved his innocence. But they'd made one critical error. They'd assumed Cole would react emotionally, that he'd confront them directly and give them the evidence they needed. They were expecting the Cole they thought they knew, the corporate executive who played by rules and respected boundaries. They were about to meet the other Cole. Danny, Cole said quietly, how do you feel about making some people very, very sorry they were ever born? That's literally my favorite thing, Danny replied. What did you have in mind? Cole outlined his plan, watching his friend's expression shift from interest to amazement to something approaching awe. Jesus Christ, Cole. That's not revenge, that's performance art. But it's going to require perfect timing and zero mistakes. Then it's a good thing we don't make mistakes. By evening, all the pieces were in place. Ryan and Lindsay thought they were moving in for the kill, unaware that they'd walked into a trap that had been months in the making. Their own greed and arrogance had blinded them to the warning signs, and now it was too late to retreat. Cole checked his watch, 72 hours and counting. Time to show these amateurs what real professionals could accomplish when properly motivated. The endgame was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Hunt Begins. The first domino fell at exactly 0800 hours when Ryan discovered his car had been repossessed from the hotel parking lot. By 0815, his credit cards were being declined. By 0830, his bank accounts were frozen pending an investigation into suspicious activity. Cole watched the panic unfold through the surveillance feed Danny had set up in the hotel room. Ryan was on the phone with his bank, his voice rising with each denial of service. Lindsay sat on the bed, still in her silk pajamas, her face cycling through confusion, anger, and the first hints of fear. This has to be Cole, she said when Ryan finally hung up. He's doing this somehow. That's impossible, Ryan replied, but his voice lacked conviction. He doesn't have access to my financial information. Cole smiled grimly. Access wasn't required when you had friends in the right places. Danny's contact in financial crimes had been very interested to learn about Ryan's history of identity theft and his current lifestyle that far exceeded his legitimate income. A few strategic phone calls about possible money laundering had triggered automatic freezes across all of Ryan's accounts. Perfectly legal, completely devastating and absolutely untraceable back to Cole. The second domino fell an hour later when hotel security knocked on their door. Ryan's credit card had been declined for the room charges, and the hotel required immediate payment or they'd be asked to leave. Watching Ryan try to maintain his composure while explaining to Lindsay that he was temporarily cash poor was almost entertaining. But Cole wasn't finished. This was just the overture. Phase 2 began when Lindsay tried to access her trust fund to cover their expenses. The fund, established by Gerald years ago, had always been Lindsay's safety net. She'd never bothered to read the terms carefully, specifically the clause that allowed Gerald to freeze disbursements if Lindsay was involved in activities detrimental to family business interests. Gerald's signature on the freeze order had been obtained 3 hours ago, right after Cole had played him selected recordings of Lindsay and Ryan's conversations about stealing company assets. The old man's face had gone through several shades of pale as he realized the extent of his daughter's betrayal. "Freeze everything," Gerald had said, his voice hollow with grief and rage. "I want her to understand what it feels like to have nothing." By noon, Lindsay and Ryan were in the hotel lobby with their suitcases, having been politely but firmly evicted. Cole watched through the security cameras as they argued in hushed voices about where to go and how to pay for anything. Their faces showed the first cracks in their confidence, the realization that their carefully laid plans were unraveling faster than they could adapt. But this was still just the beginning. Cole's phone buzzed with an update from Marcus Webb. "Kozlov has been neutralized. Won't be taking their calls anymore." The conversation with Viktor Kozlov had been brief but effective. When presented with evidence of his connection to Ryan Torres and informed that Torres was being investigated by federal authorities for financial crimes, the Russian had immediately distanced himself from the operation. Professional criminals didn't survive by associating with sloppy amateurs who attracted law enforcement attention. This left Lindsay and Ryan completely isolated, cut off from their financial resources and their offshore escape plan. They were beginning to understand that they'd overestimated their own cleverness and seriously underestimated their opponent. Cole decided it was time to let them know they were being hunted. The message was delivered through Danny's people, professionals who specialized in psychological warfare. Ryan received a phone call from someone claiming to be an FBI agent investigating financial irregularities at Hawthorne Security. The caller didn't make any direct accusations, just asked where Ryan could be reached for follow-up questions and mentioned that they'd be very interested in speaking with him about his business relationship with Viktor Kozlov. Lindsay's message was more personal. A woman approached her in the coffee shop where she was hiding, introduced herself as a private investigator, and handed her a manila envelope. "Your husband asked me to give you this," the woman said casually. "He thought you should know what kind of man you're really involved with." The envelope contained Ryan's complete criminal history, including police reports from the sexual assault allegations and documentation of his identity theft schemes. But the real gut punch was the final document, a psychological profile that identified Ryan as a classic predatory sociopath who targets vulnerable women from wealthy families. Cole knew Lindsay well enough to predict her reaction. She'd built her entire identity around being too smart to be fooled, too sophisticated to be manipulated. Learning that she was just another mark in Ryan's long con would be devastating to her ego. By evening, the couple had found temporary shelter in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The surveillance feeds showed them in separate corners of the room, no longer touching, barely speaking. The pressure was working exactly as intended. Cole made one final call that day, to a contact in the district attorney's office. "Jennifer? It's Cole Mitchell. I need to discuss some irregularities I've discovered in my company's financial records. Irregularities that point to embezzlement and possible money laundering." The conversation was brief but productive. Cole had prepared a carefully edited version of events that painted Ryan as the primary culprit and Lindsay as a possible accomplice. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, and Jennifer agreed to open a preliminary investigation. By tomorrow morning, there would be real federal agents looking for Ryan Torres, and they wouldn't be nearly as polite as Danny's impersonator had been. Cole checked his watch, 48 hours remaining. Phase 3 would begin tomorrow, and that's when things would get genuinely unpleasant for his targets. So far, he'd been destroying their external resources, their money, their connections, their escape routes. Tomorrow, he'd start destroying them from the inside. As he prepared for sleep in his Spartan apartment, Cole felt a familiar sense of anticipation. In Afghanistan, this was the feeling he'd had before a major operation, the calm certainty that came from superior planning, overwhelming force, and absolute commitment to the mission. Lindsay and Ryan had declared war on him. Now they were about to learn what war with Cole Mitchell actually looked like. Chapter 7. Psychological Warfare. The third day began with Ryan's complete psychological breakdown. Cole watched through the surveillance feed as the younger man paced the motel room like a caged animal, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking under pressure. "This is insane," Ryan shouted at Lindsay, who sat on the bed staring at the criminal history documents. "Someone's orchestrating this. It can't be coincidence." "You lied to me," Lindsay said, her voice eerily calm. "About everything. Your background, your experience, your past. Who are you really?" The fight that followed was exactly what Cole had engineered. Trust was the foundation of any conspiracy, and once that foundation cracked, the entire structure collapsed. By noon, Ryan and Lindsay were no longer partners. They were adversaries, each blaming the other for their rapidly deteriorating situation. But Cole wasn't finished applying pressure. The knock on their motel room door came at 1,400 hours, sharp. Two actual FBI agents, following up on the complaint Cole had filed through official channels. They weren't there to arrest anyone, yet, but their questions were pointed and professional. "Mr. Torres, we're investigating irregularities in the finances of Hawthorne Security Solutions. We understand you recently worked there?" Cole listened to the conversation through the surveillance feed, admiring the agent's technique. They didn't accuse Ryan of anything directly, but they made it clear they knew about his background and were very interested in his recent activities. "We'd appreciate it if you remained available for further questioning," one agent said as they prepared to leave. "And Mr. Torres, we strongly advise against any travel outside the state until this matter is resolved." After the agents left, Ryan turned to Lindsay with panic in his eyes. "We need to run. Now, before this gets worse." "With what money?" Lindsay snapped. "You've maxed out every credit card, emptied every account. We can't even afford gas money, let alone plane tickets." "Then call your father. Make a deal." Lindsay's laugh was bitter. "My father isn't taking my calls. He's frozen my trust fund and told his lawyer to fight the divorce as aggressively as possible. According to the prenup, if I'm found to have committed adultery, I get nothing." Cole felt a moment of satisfaction. Gerald had recovered from his initial shock and was now fighting back with the fury of a man protecting everything he'd built. The old man might be heartbroken about his daughter's betrayal, but he wasn't about to let her destroy his life's work. Phase 4 began that evening with a more personal touch. Cole had spent hours studying Lindsay's psychological profile, looking for the pressure points that would cause maximum damage. He found them in her relationship with her mother. Patricia Hawthorne had died when Lindsay was 12, leaving her daughter with unresolved abandonment issues that shaped every relationship she'd had since. Cole knew that Lindsay's greatest fear was being truly alone, which was why she'd always moved from one relationship to another without gaps. The message Cole sent was simple but devastating. A single photograph slipped under their motel room door. It showed Patricia Hawthorne's grave, with fresh flowers and a note that read, "I'm sorry I raised a daughter who became everything you despised. Gerald." Cole had placed the flowers himself and forged Gerald's handwriting, but Lindsay wouldn't question the authenticity. She'd be too devastated by the implications, that her father had disowned her so completely that he was apologizing to her dead mother for her existence. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. Lindsay collapsed onto the motel bed, sobbing with the kind of raw grief that came from losing everything that mattered. Ryan tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away, and Cole could see the final bonds between them dissolving in real time. "This is your fault," she whispered to Ryan. "All of this. You said you had a plan. You said we'd be rich. You said—" "I said a lot of things," Ryan interrupted, his own mask finally slipping. "But you were so eager to believe them, weren't you? So ready to betray your husband, your father, everyone who cared about you. Don't blame me for giving you what you wanted." The conversation devolved into mutual recriminations and accusations, exactly as Cole had intended. Divide and conquer wasn't just military strategy, it was human nature. Turn allies against each other, and they destroy themselves more effectively than any external attack. Cole made his final move of the day with a phone call to a bail bondsman named Eddie Torino, a man whose establishment was located conveniently close to the city jail. "Eddie, I need a favor. There's going to be a young man brought in tomorrow on financial crimes charges. Ryan Torres. When he calls looking for bail money, I want you to make him an offer he can't refuse, but one that comes with very specific strings attached." "What kind of strings?" "The kind that ensure he throws his girlfriend under the bus to save his own skin." Cole had spent years learning that the most effective warfare happened inside people's heads, not on battlefields. Fear, guilt, desperation, and betrayal were weapons more devastating than any bomb. Lindsay and Ryan had used those same weapons against him and Gerald, but they were amateurs playing with tools they didn't understand. Cole was a professional. As he prepared for the final phase of his operation, Cole felt no satisfaction, no joy, only the cold certainty that justice was being served. These people had declared war on his family, had tried to destroy everything he and Gerald had built together. Tomorrow, they would reap the consequences of that decision. His phone buzzed with a text from Gerald. "I don't know what you're doing, but the feds called. They want to meet tomorrow about Lindsay and Ryan. Whatever evidence you've provided, it's enough for them to move forward with charges." Cole typed back, "Justice is coming, Gerald. For both of us." He meant every word. By this time tomorrow, Lindsay and Ryan would understand that some people shouldn't be crossed, some lines shouldn't be violated, and some men were far more dangerous than they appeared. The hunt was almost over. Chapter 8. The net closes. The fourth day dawned with the sound of police sirens outside the motel. Cole watched through the surveillance feed as Ryan Torres was led away in handcuffs, charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. The federal investigation had moved faster than expected, spurred by additional evidence that had mysteriously appeared in the prosecutor's files overnight. Lindsay stood in the doorway of their motel room, watching the only person she had left in the world disappear into the back of a police cruiser. Her face was empty, hollowed out by the realization that she was now completely alone with no resources and no allies. But Cole wasn't finished with her yet. The phone call came an hour later, while Lindsay was sitting on the motel bed staring at the wall. The voice on the other end was professional, sympathetic, and completely fabricated. "Miss Hawthorne, this is Detective Sarah Chun with the Domestic Violence Unit. We've received some disturbing information about your relationship with Ryan Torres. We'd like to speak with you about possible charges." The conversation was brief but effective. Cole's people had crafted a narrative suggesting that Ryan had been physically abusive, using Lindsay's own statements about their relationship as evidence. It was the same tactic they'd planned to use against Cole, turned back on them with surgical precision. By noon, Lindsay was at the police station, not as a witness, but as a potential victim being questioned about Ryan's pattern of manipulative and abusive behavior. The irony wasn't lost on Cole. They were being destroyed by the very lies they'd prepared to use against him. The real breakthrough came when Ryan, facing federal charges and the possibility of decades in prison, decided to negotiate. Eddie Torino's conversation with him had been exactly as Cole had scripted. "Look, kid, your bail is set at $500,000. I can front that money, but I need collateral. Information. The kind that might help certain people understand how you got into this mess." Ryan, desperate and terrified, had provided a full confession. He detailed the entire conspiracy, how he'd targeted Lindsay because of her father's wealth, how they'd planned to frame Cole and steal the company assets, how the whole affair had been orchestrated from the beginning. But Ryan's confession contained an unexpected revelation that changed everything. Lindsay hadn't been a co-conspirator, she'd been another victim. Ryan had identified her as a mark months before applying for the job at Hawthorne Security, had researched her psychological vulnerabilities, and had manipulated her into believing the affair was her idea. Cole felt his rage shift and focus as he read the transcript. Lindsay was guilty of adultery and betrayal, but she'd been played by a professional con artist who specialized in exploiting lonely, wealthy women. She was weak and selfish, but she wasn't the criminal mastermind Cole had assumed. This changed the equation significantly. Gerald arrived at Cole's apartment that evening, looking older than his years, but with fire still burning in his eyes. "The feds briefed me on everything," Gerald said, settling into the single chair Cole's Spartan space provided. "Ryan's confession, the evidence you gathered, all of it. They're calling it one of the most sophisticated corporate infiltration schemes they've seen. What about Lindsay? Cole asked. Gerald's face crumpled slightly. She's broken, completely destroyed. The doctors think she's having some kind of psychological breakdown from the trauma. She keeps asking for you. For me. She says she needs to apologize, that she understands what happened now. The FBI psych evaluation suggests she's been manipulated for months, maybe longer. Ryan was very good at what he did. Cole was quiet for a long moment, processing this new information. His plan had been designed to destroy two conspirators equally, but the reality was more complex. Lindsay was guilty of betrayal, but she'd also been victimized by someone far more sophisticated than either of them had realized. What do you want me to do? He asked Gerald. I want you to come home, the older man said simply. Your job is waiting, your office is exactly as you left it, and frankly, I need you. This whole situation has shown me how vulnerable the company is to this kind of attack. We need better security, better protocols, better everything. And Lindsay. Gerald was quiet for a long time. She's my daughter, he said finally. She made terrible choices, but she's still my blood. I can't just abandon her, even after everything she's done. But I also can't trust her with the company anymore. She'll need to find her own way. Cole nodded slowly. The anger that had sustained him for the past 4 days was beginning to fade, replaced by something more complex. Justice had been served. Ryan would spend years in federal prison, and Lindsay would live with the consequences of her choices. But complete destruction had never been the goal. The goal had been protection. Protecting Gerald, protecting the company, protecting the life they'd built together. I'll come back, Cole said. But things will be different. New security protocols, new safeguards, new everything. I won't let us be vulnerable like this again. Agreed, Gerald said, standing and extending his hand. Partners. Partners, Cole confirmed, shaking the older man's hand. As Gerald left, Cole made one final call to Danny in Las Vegas. It's over, he said simply. Clean up the surveillance and destroy all the records. This operation never happened. What about the woman? Lindsay. Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking about the broken woman sitting in a police interview room, finally understanding how completely she'd been manipulated. She's suffered enough, he said finally. Let her rebuild her life, if she can. Cole Mitchell had always been a man who finished what he started, but he was also a man who understood the difference between justice and vengeance. Ryan Torres would pay the full price for his crimes. Lindsay would live with the consequences of her choices, but she'd have the chance to make better ones in the future. Sometimes that was enough. Chapter 9, New Foundations. 6 months later, Cole stood in his rebuilt office at Hawthorne Security Solutions, looking out at a company that had emerged stronger from its trial by fire. The new security protocols he'd implemented were cutting edge. The employee screening process was thorough enough to satisfy military standards, and the financial oversight systems would have prevented another Ryan Torres from getting within a mile of sensitive information. Gerald knocked on the door frame, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression Cole had learned to recognize, serious but not grim. The Torres sentencing came through this morning, Gerald said, settling into the chair across from Cole's desk. 15 years federal, no possibility of parole for the first 7. The judge called him a predator who targeted vulnerable families and recommended psychological evaluation for sociopathic tendencies. Cole nodded. Justice had been served, though he felt no satisfaction in the outcome. Ryan Torres was exactly what he'd appeared to be from the beginning, a dangerous predator who'd finally been stopped. The real tragedy was how many lives he'd damaged before being caught. Any word on Lindsay? Cole asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Gerald's expression softened slightly. She's doing better. The therapy is helping, and she started working at a nonprofit in Denver. Child advocacy, helping kids who've been manipulated by predators. Says she understands what that feels like now. Cole was surprised by the choice. Lindsay had always been self-centered, focused on her own comfort and desires. The idea of her dedicating time to helping others suggested a fundamental change in character. She asked me to give you this, Gerald continued, pulling a sealed envelope from his jacket pocket. Said she's been trying to write it for months. Cole took the envelope but didn't open it immediately. He'd been expecting some form of contact from Lindsay eventually, but he wasn't sure what he wanted to hear from her. Gerald, he said carefully, I need you to understand something. What happened between Lindsay and me? That's finished. Whatever she says in this letter, whatever she might hope for, I'm not interested in reconciliation. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Gerald nodded slowly. I understand, son. And honestly, I think she does too. This isn't about getting back together. It's about something else. Cole opened the envelope and read the handwritten letter inside. Lindsay's penmanship was still elegant, but there was something different about it. Less calculated, more genuine. Cole, I know you have no reason to read this, and even less reason to believe anything I say. I've spent 6 months in therapy trying to understand how I became someone capable of the things I did, and I'm still not sure I have all the answers. What I do know is that I was weak, selfish, and cruel. I betrayed a man who loved me, hurt a father who trusted me, and nearly destroyed something beautiful because I was too damaged to recognize its value. Ryan didn't make me do those things. He just gave me permission to be the worst version of myself. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm not asking for another chance because I know that's impossible. I'm writing to tell you that the work you and Dad built together is safe with you, and that's all I ever wanted it to be. The children I work with now have been manipulated by adults who were supposed to protect them. When I help them understand that the abuse wasn't their fault, that they deserve better, that they can build new lives, I think about you and Dad and the life I threw away. I can't fix what I broke, but maybe I can keep other people from making the same mistakes. Thank you for not destroying me completely when you had every right to do so. I know you showed mercy when I didn't deserve it, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that mercy. Take care of Dad for me. He loves you like the son he never had, and he needs you more than he'll ever admit. Lindsay. Cole read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in his desk drawer. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was an acknowledgement of responsibility and a promise to do better. That was more than he'd expected from the woman who'd tried to destroy him. She's not asking to come back, he told Gerald. No, the older man agreed. She understands that bridge is burned. But I think she needed you to know that she understands why it had to burn. Cole's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Senator Whitfield's office. The security contract they'd won in the aftermath of the Ryan Torres scandal had led to bigger opportunities, and Hawthorne Security was now protecting some of the most important people in the country. I need to take this, Cole said, reaching for the phone. Gerald stood to leave, then paused at the door. Cole, what you did to protect this company. I never asked for details, and I don't need them. But I want you to know that everything you built here will outlast all of us. That's a hell of a legacy. As Gerald left, Cole answered the phone and dove back into the work that had become his life's mission. Building something that mattered, protecting people who deserved protection, and ensuring that predators like Ryan Torres couldn't destroy what good people worked to create. He'd started this journey as a soldier following orders. Then he'd become a businessman building a company. But the events of the past year had transformed him into something else entirely. A guardian, standing watch over the things that mattered most. The letter from Lindsay would stay in his desk drawer, a reminder that people could change, for better or worse, and that mercy, carefully applied, was sometimes more powerful than vengeance. Cole Mitchell had learned to forgive, but he would never forget. The next predator who threatened his family would discover that some guardians never stopped being soldiers, and some soldiers never learned to show mercy twice. Outside his window, the city continued its daily rhythm, unaware that one of its most dangerous protectors was watching from the shadows, ready to defend what couldn't defend itself. The storm had passed, but Cole remained, vigilant, uncompromising, and absolutely lethal to anyone foolish enough to threaten the people he'd sworn to protect. Some battles ended in victory. Others ended in understanding. The best ones ended in both. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.